Hi everybody. Ahead of today's video, could you help me settle a little bit of a debate? I was out and about with my other half the other day, and a Subaru went past in the distance. I heard the distinctive rumble of a flat 4, and I said, someone with a Subaru there. And she turned and looked at me slightly aghast and said, how do you know that was a Subaru? You can't possibly know that was a Subaru. It's dark. It's something moving about over there. And I said, well, that's because it sounds like a Subaru, distinctly like a Subaru and nothing else. And she said, no, that's absolutely impossible. So, petrol-heady people of the internet, could you please hop into the comment section and tell me this is the noise of a Subaru? Because it is. And let's be real here, shall we? That noise is iconic. You mentioned Subaru, and that is what people think of, along with pictures of a blue and gold car hooning down a rally stage, possibly being piloted by a one Mr. C. McRae. Now, there are, of course, other Subarus available for those that need a slightly more practical vehicle, the Legacy, the Forester, the Outback. However, even I was not aware until very recently, at one point in time, Subaru did have a crack at making a 7-seater minivan. And Subaru being Subaru, they did it in their own way. That is what I'm driving today. It's called the Exiga. It's not a Lotus, but is it any good? Let's find out more after the funky music. This is not the only 7-seater car that Subaru have ever made. Both before and after it, they had 7-seater versions of large SUVs, but those really are fairly common cars. Lesser spotted, though, are 7-seater estates. The one that always springs to mind is the old Mercedes E-Class, but the thing is with that, the rear row of seats was really for children only. I have tried to fit in them and failed spectacularly, which did not happen today when I got myself in the back of the Exiga. Now, let's be honest here, if you're looking for a 7-seater car explicitly, you need those seats to be useful, and possibly even useful for more than just children. And despite the fact this isn't a massive car, had I guessed I wouldn't have said it was a 7-seater, there's still quite a bit of room back there. Now, those seats are a little raised compared with the front 2 rows, and so for me, I had to sort of slouch a little bit. But in terms of legroom, there is just about enough, and getting in and out is really easy. The middle row of seats slides forward nice and swiftly and gives you plenty of access, so even those with more limited mobility, I think, should still be able to get in and out. Though, if you're putting Grandma in the back row, I mean, did you really want her on the journey anyway? Regardless, there's actually an impressive amount of legroom in the middle row, though weirdly, it's the front that actually feels the most cramped. Strange, but anyway, there is 7 proper seats available to you in this car, which is nice. What about the rest of it though? Well, it's an interesting duck this, as I expect you'd think anything called the Exiga to be. That apparently is a combination of the words excellent and active, neither of which have a G in. But let's just ignore that for a second. Underneath here, what you have is I think, modified version of the Legacy platform. This car's lovely owner, Richie, who has driven it a very, very long way to bring it to me, and therefore is a legend, tells me that finding information on these can be a little bit difficult. Even in the rarefied world of the JDM vehicle, they're a somewhat niche product, chiefly designed for the Japanese domestic market. However, they did get exported, I think, to Singapore and potentially later Australia as well. They were introduced in 2008, facelifted in 2012, and then discontinued by around 2018, replaced by a dirty great big 4x4. Considering the fact that until Richie emailed me about it, if somebody said to me, do you want to drive my Exiga, I would have thought that was a Lotus with a typo. I'm actually surprised at how many of these are for sale in Great Britain. All of them, of course, will be imports, and presently on Auto Trader, there are no fewer than 8 of them for sale. This impresses me, and it means a couple of things. First off, that people actually are interested enough in them to want to bring them over, and secondly, that if you do want to buy one, you've got a few to choose from. That is in contrast to some of the JDM rarities I've driven recently, brought to me by my good friend Brad, where he has the one and only example up for sale in the country. That means I can give you a spread of pricing for these, and they seem to start at about the sort of £7,000 to £8,000 mark, up to around about £13,000. There are a few different trim levels, including a few with a naturally aspirated engine. Then you have, for the early cars, this top-of-the-line GT, which under the bonnet has a 220 horsepower version of the famous Subaru flat 4 boxer engine, complete with turbocharger. As far as we are aware, in that department, this car is pretty much standard. The only modifications that we're certain about are the fitment of a Mishimoto radiator, sourced chiefly because it was much easier to get than the original, and presumably a little bit better, and also a set of BC Racing coilovers, fitted for the exact same reasons. Up front, you will also find a strut brace, and in order to unlock just a little bit of that classic Subaru soundtrack, the car has also had a back box delete. Under his watch, the car has had no form of map or anything else, though we aren't certain what was done to it in Japan, and Richie is this car's first UK owner. Many of the parts fitted to the car were supplied by Subaru Bits, and he said he's had a great experience with both them and Torque GT as well. When the car was inspected, the condition of it was found to be generally good, and other than the fact one of the dampers was past its best, which is why it now has the BC setup on, the car really has been pretty good. Often it seems people are still under this assumption that anything and everything which has lived in Japan is in effectively concours condition because, well, that's how the Japanese look after their cars, don't you know? And that, simply put, isn't true. There will be plenty of people in Japan that don't really care about their car, or where things have happened, and though no, the Japanese don't put salt on their roads, they are an island surrounded by a lot of salty water. So yeah, their cars definitely can still rust. This one though, happily, very good on that front. I suppose the car that's sort of closest to this in sort of ethos that I've driven recently would be the Mitsubishi Lancer Sedia Turbo, but in truth, this feels like a very different proposition. Not only is it noticeably larger, this is about 4.7 meters long, so a fair bit bigger than the Sedia, which was a strict 5-seater, it also is a little bit newer, a little bit nicer, a little bit faster, and just feels generally a little bit better put together. It just feels like a newer, nicer, better car. Still though, very Japanese and very, very Subaru. What do I mean by that? Well, first off, this steering is absolutely lifeless. It is incredibly light, doesn't really want to talk to me. It seems like Subaru for a very, very long time struggled with their steering. Only in the very late WRX STI cars, when they dropped the Impreza name, did they actually seem to get their steering right. Up until that point, it was... Oh, crikey, oh blimey. People love cutting that corner, and I just don't know why, because it's not sighted, and anyway. But yeah, steering here, it's just not grand. The suspension setup, though for the most part is okay. I have been told it's currently set on the firmer side of things, and you can tell that. I personally wouldn't like it quite this firm. However, one of the reasons for that is that if you do put people in the back, and that's part of the point of this car, as it was, certainly before the BCs went on, it would like to sort of grind out quite easily. Now, that's not a concern. The other thing that I know a lot of people wouldn't like about this car is the gearbox. Now, depending on exactly which trim you got, there were a number of different gearboxes available. However, for this, I think the one and only you could have had was a 5-speed torque converter automatic, the codename for which I believe is the 5EAT. As it happened, this is the one and only thing that has given Richie any trouble, because recently it started acting up. Luckily, it turned out to be just a sensor, and with about 5 hours labour and a relatively affordable part later, it was all sorted. Other variants of this car, though, come with a CVT gearbox, what I think Subaru call Lineartronic. I've never been quite certain why it is that the Japanese have a real affinity for the CVT. Maybe that's because in some sort of technical sense it is a very good gearbox, but I'm not really a fan of them, and in anything sporty I just think it's the wrong kind of box to have. This, though, at normal town speeds is doing its job just fine. In order to help you a little bit, the car does have a little mode selector down here, which Subaru dub SI Drive, and you can have either Sport, which I'm in now and is effectively the normal mode, or if you press it, you'll get Eco, or Intelligent, I think they call it, but if you twist it, you'll get Sport Sharp. And that is the mode that has been recommended to me. Oh, crikey, that was awful. That was a manhole cover that was slightly sunken, and I was warned that they do make some odd noises. And oh, that's a horrid noise. It sounds like the suspension's falling apart. Oh dear, oh dear. I'm going to try and avoid more of those, but it's kind of difficult on these roads. There are, of course, no adaptive dampers in this car, nor were there ever any, so all that's really changing are the parameters for your throttle and your gearbox. You can also change gear manually, if you like, by pulling the lever over to the right, and then if you pull it towards you, you'll go down a gear. You push it away, you'll go up. Actually, I have to say, that's a more responsive action than I thought it was going to be, so I might actually dabble a bit with manual. I'm going to turn around here and then put my foot down and see how the car performs. Naturally, this being a performance-orientated Subaru, it has all-wheel drive, their famous symmetrical system, which is generally fairly well regarded. For the lower models, all-wheel drive was optional, but with the GT, it is standard. How's the turning circle? Not typically a Subaru strength, and here it's not really a strength. It's not terrible, but neither is it great. Well, I had wanted to put my foot down, but as I turned around, this chappie pulled out in front of me. Oh, now he's pulling over. Oh, yes, please, do let me past. I would like to get past. Indicators on the right, as you might expect for anything JDM. This car also now has a Kenwood head unit in it because, you know, why not? Dual zone climate control, no heated seats, and of course, plenty of fabric rather than leather, as is the Japanese way. Love the massive panoramic sunroof. That makes a big difference. But right about now, what I'm interested in is how this car handles when you want to have fun. So let's see. Yeah, it's like a Subaru. I'm actually half impressed with that gearbox. The downshifts it's given me are actually pretty good. That's really responsive. Upshifts, though, even in Sport Sharp mode, quite lethargic, both in terms of response and the speed of the shift itself. So you do that, and it's just bleh, but then on the way down, shift, shift. Weird. There are no paddles or anything for it, and I'm just going to leave it in drive now, but honestly it's actually not that bad. The engine definitely feels like it hasn't had a map. I believe 220 horsepower. In terms of weight, it is of course not a particularly small car. I think the curb here is about 1.6 to 1.7 tons. One criticism I do have of this car is the seats. I don't hate these ones, but you get into any Impreza WRX and they are brilliant. These are just, well, they're just seats. They're not nice to look at, they're not particularly comfortable, nor are they particularly supportive. So, yeah, chuck these out, get some out of an Impreza that somebody's probably already thrown out because they think they're not good enough, but honestly, they're great. Visibility is excellent. You have so much glass, the belt line of the car is really low, you feel like you're fairly far forward in it. You've got that beautiful classic Subaru little bonnet vent there, which you get only on the turbocharged model. That feeds straight into the intercooler sat on top of the engine. This car also is in a lovely shade. Now, in one of the photos that Richie sent to me, it looked like it was in the regular classic Subaru blue, WRC mica or whatever they want to call it. However, this is not that shade at all. It's far lighter, more sort of turquoisey. I believe it's called Aurora blue, but we're not certain. In any case, I do like the look of it. I really, really do. I think that exhaust is actually perfectly judged. When you consider the fact it's a complete back box delete and still it sounds this sort of muted, and on a run you don't really notice it, I'm impressed. This tells you probably how quiet it was when the back box was still intact. this little device up here has been fitted because apparently it's reasonably difficult to convert the speedo, and I'm really quite enjoying this. Yeah, steering is lifeless, it's not massively luxurious in here, but I like this a lot. I think it's a decent looking car. It's interesting, a little bit like a stretched version of the Skoda Yeti that I drove recently in some ways. It's certainly not an ugly thing compared to many of the modern equivalents you would get if you wanted a 7-seater. I think for me, I'd really view it as likely a sort of 6-seater but with a good sized boot, or if you need it, a 5 or 4-seater with a massive boot. This car is a masterpiece of packaging, it really is. I've currently got a Kia EV9 on test, which is a modern day electric monstrosity, and that's quite a bit bigger, both in practice and in sort of feel, yet doesn't really have any more space in it at all. Subaru done good here. You also get the Subaru Wave. It's one of those brands where if you see somebody else driving along and they've also got something with the Pleiades star cluster on the bonnet, you can give them a nice wave or a thumbs up and you almost always will get one back. That's something I do miss about Subaru ownership. Unfortunately, Subaru ownership does still sometimes have something of a stigma attached to it, though most of the people I know that are buying these cars today are doing so because they're really enthusiasts and they appreciate what the brand did, certainly back in the 90s. There are still a few people out there buying them just to be yobs, and that is a shame because actually the cars are fundamentally brilliant, as are most of the people that I know who are into their Subarus. So if you're watching this and you're part of a Subaru owners group, please do go somewhat easy on me. I do like most of the cars, not all of them though. Some of them are a bit much. And you know, don't you? You know the ones that I'm talking about. In any case, you know, I'm driving this and I'm just thinking my mate Ben over at Dad Cars would love to get his hand on this because he loves his Japanese stuff, but he also needs a practical car that's also a little bit interesting, and this is him to a T. I don't need a car like this. I don't need necessarily this many seats, but I like this a lot. Fuel economy is going to be an issue. We haven't managed to work out exactly what it is because all of the figures are in the Japanese system, but looking at those, I think this is going to be doing vaguely similar to what you'd expect of an Impreza of the day, so in the 20s, not the high 20s. I will confess the driving dynamics are a little bit disappointing, but then they are really a mini a Subaru. I've been criticised a lot for saying they're not great handling cars, and people go, yes, of course they are, look at how grippy they are. Well, no, there's grip and handling to me are two separate things. The road holding of this appears to be very good. It's not really even felt like it's remotely close to getting unstuck, even with the road still being a bit patchy. But the interaction I have with the car, the communication between me, it, and the road is just not good. And that suspension, oh, that's horrible. That feels like it's just bottoming out every time. I don't like that at all. That does need some adjustment. That's not good. I've not really experienced that in many cars, I have to say. But yeah, set that aside and ignore that, and I'm sure that can be fixed. This is a good package for someone looking for something interesting, usable, sort of go anywhere, do anything with the all-wheel drive and rally heritage and all that, but that doesn't break the bank. Yeah, Subaru Exiga, it's quite a good car actually.